Now, if you want to do a little bit more fancy things with your materials, and again, this is the KeyShot 7.1 Pro, you're probably going to go into your material graph. So I open up the material graph. If I have the glass selected here, we can go into the material graph, and you're going to see what we have here. Let's go ahead and move this over to the side so we can kind of see what we're doing at the same time. There we go. So we have our texture map for our logo, which is going into plastic, which I forgot to mention. If you double click on that, it's being planar projected, which we've moved around, and we've changed the depth and all that good stuff. And the actual plastic material is being applied to this texture map. So if we go over here to our material and we go into labels and we choose our diffuse here, you're going to see we have plastic. We can change this to whatever we'd like. So instead of plastic, if you want to do maybe metal, we can change that to a metal, and you can kind of see now it's more reflective and more metal looking. Another thing you can do is you can hold down Alt and you can drag this into the bump, for example, and then that'll apply a bump based on your color map. Now that's not a perfect bump. You can see how it kind of goes in on the black and then out on this color. You'd probably want to make a bump map that was just, you know, bumped out for the entire thing, and it would be a separate map that you would bring in. But in a pinch, you can just go in here and just alt drag this texture over here, and now you've got a bump map. If you want to, you can change the bump map here. Let's go ahead and drag this down a little bit. So the bump selected, if you open this bump menu down here, you can change the bump height to a smaller value, or you can bump it in. Just give it a little bit of a bump. And you can also go back up here to your labels here, and we'll change that back from a metal to a plastic, and it'll still have a bump, but it'll be plastic instead. Or if you don't want the bump, you can just turn it off. Just go ahead and uncheck that box. And if you want to get rid of it completely, you can delete it here, or you can just go through here and see this one's plugged in the diffuse, this one's plugged in the bump, but it's disabled. You can go ahead and just delete that from your material graph. If you ever need to reorganize this, if you got this thing all over the place, just hit this little button here, and that will go ahead and align your nodes to your work area. And let's go ahead and let's pass a texture into the bump of this glass. We'll kind of do a little bit of fancy stuff with the glass here. So if I can right click in here and go to textures, and we can choose either we can bring in a texture map if we want to, or we can go right down here. Let's just choose our noise again. We've been using this noise texture quite a bit. So with this noise texture, we can just drop it onto this object here, or onto the glass, and say I want it to go into bump. Or you could probably just drag it and drop it right on the bump if you want to. Now with that selected, we're applying a noise texture to this glass, and now it's giving it kind of a frosted look, which is okay, but it's frosting the entire glass. And it's also, if you wanted to make the bump a little bit bigger, what you can do is you can have this selected and you can hit C. What that does, if you right click this, it's going to preview the color. You can hit A to preview alpha and B to preview bump. I'm just going to preview color on this one, and it's going to show you a preview of the color. So right now it's a very, very small bump here. So if I double click this noise texture here, it's going to the glass. Did it do anything? Let's see. Okay, double click the noise texture. It's not going to show up over here. I'm going to hit C so it previews, and I'm just going to go over here, and so we got the scale here. If I scale this up, it's going to scale it to like 0.019. I'm just going to change this to 1. There we go. So now we have very, very large bump, so we can kind of scale this down. And we're just previewing what it looks like on my object. If I hit C again, that's going to get rid of the preview, and now you can see it's actually applying a bump to our glass. So we're getting kind of a knobby, ridged looking glass right here, which is that's what you're going for. Perfect. But let's say we want kind of a frosted bump look from the bottom all the way up to the top. Well, the first thing we'd want to do is scale this back down. That's going to give us more of that frosted look as we continue to scale this noise down. Something like that. As it reses in, you're going to see it kind of gets a little bit frosted. I guess we can make it a little bit bigger, make it a little bit more obvious to our eyeballs. There we go. So it's getting a much more bumpy frosted texture. But let's say we want it the bottom to be frosted, but it to be less bumpy towards the top. So what we can do to control that is we can right click in here. We can go to textures, and let's do a color gradient. Now this color gradient, like we did before on the logo, is going to go from one color to another color. Right now color 1 and color 2 is white and black. So I'm going to use that to control my bump height. We're going to go from black, I believe, is 0, and then bump height of white to 1, I believe. We'll figure it out. So I'm going to drag this right on here, and I'm going to change that to bump height. So now in order to see what this gradient is actually doing, let's click it and hit C, and that's going to preview it on our object here. And now we're going to see it's kind of going from like black over here to white over here. So we need to change this. So let's go ahead and say move texture. I'm going to move it in towards the middle here. Let's see, rotate it around this way. There we go. So it's going from like black to the handle to white to the front. Oops. So we're going to rotate it this way first. And then we're going to rotate it, I guess, this way, because we want it to be frosted on the bottom and then dark on the top here. While we're moving this thing around, we can kind of eyeball that. And we can also move it down this way. You can move it this way, so we're getting black for sure on the top, but we can also control that with another node, which we'll get to in a second. Anyway, we'll go ahead and click check. So now it should be going from bumpy to not bumpy. Let's make sure that's the case here. So I'm going to hit C to go out of that mode. And it looks like I changed my background color when I hit C in here. We sampled it. Let's go back to our environment here. We'll change the color again to a gray here. Okay. So now we've got that, and you can see it looks like it is going from a frosty all the way up to a clear transparent, I think. And just to make this a little bit more obvious, let's double click this texture and we'll go ahead and scale this up. So now the bump height is going from full bump to low bump, which is kind of what we're looking for. To control that gradient, what we can do is we can go into our utilities here. And let's try doing a color to number. That's kind of like using a level. So if I pass this one into color to number, and then we pass this one into our bump height here, when I double click color to number and hit C, that's going to give us a result. And then as I change these values, we can make it go from very bumpy on the bottom to a little more dark overall. So it's like kind of like clamping the values. And if we change this input from, it's going to start, let's change that to 1. There we go. You can kind of see that's going to start dropping this value down. So we want to make this all the way transparent and then start dialing this back down and then lightening the bottom. You can kind of do that. Now again, to see what you're doing, just tap C, and now you're going to start seeing the frosting go in here. If we hit C again, we can take this color gradient map and take the move texture, and we can just move this thing down. So I don't really want any bump on the handle, so I do want to kind of frost this bottom here. That'll be fine. We'll go ahead and check OK, and that's where we'll leave off. And now that we have that applied, we'll just go ahead and hit C, go back to our renderer here, and now we've got a frosted bottom going to a clear top here. And that's how you can do that. Of course, if you don't want any of this stuff, you can just delete it, but I guess we'll go ahead and leave it. So what else we want to do? We've talked about the material graph here and glass rendering, and again, the basics really are just going to your lighting here and making sure that caustics is turned on and global illumination. And in fact, let's go ahead and change our environment a little bit. Let's go ahead and go to our interior. There we go. Getting a little bit more interesting reflections on here. Helps a little bit. And also under scene here, I forgot we had the little topper here. So now this one, we could probably put translucent milk on there. So if we go back to materials here, liquids, we can drop some translucent milk. Double click that. Let's go ahead and go to the textures here. We'll put a big bump on there. So we're going to the bump here, right click, textures. We'll try a noise fractal here. And we'll change that bump height up. And if we want to, we can also, I forgot, you can right click in here and you can go show only. And now we're only going to see what we're working on here. So that'll kind of help a little bit. And again, we can open up this material graph, and if we just want to see what this bump is doing, we can select it, hit C, and now we can see, oh, it's very small. So let's go in here and change that scale to 1, and then we'll hit C again. There we go. So we're kind of getting a nice bumpy texture. We can go ahead and scale that down just a bit, I think. Getting some nice froth, and let's go ahead and crank that bump height up to like maybe 2. And again, if we want to watch this res in a little bit faster, we can go over here to image. Now we do have this lighting here, so we go over here and instead of this custom, we'll go back down to product. This will help it render faster, as well as going over here to image region and just moving this region over. So now we're only going to render a very small portion of it. I'm going to go back here to my translucent properties here for my material. And I'm going to crank this up. Let's go up to 1. I want this to have a very soft look to it. And for our subsurface here, you can dial in different colors. You can put in like maybe a tan because it is kind of coffee cream here. And we'll go ahead and turn off region here. And we'll go ahead and turn everything else back on. So I can right click here and then I can do show all parts. That'll bring everything else back. And now we've got that little top piece there. Got our coffee with the bubbles underneath, and we've got our logo right here on the front. Now we can hold down control, and we can of course move our environment, lighting environment around. And if you had a cool backplate of like a kitchen or something, you could drop that in there and also get that kind of cool effect as well. We could also probably trade this logo out. Right now we're using the black logo, but because we're using a darker color, let's go ahead and see if we can't go into labels here. Double click that. And we'll choose the white logo. And also on that coffee, I'm going to change this transparency distance to like 0.4. We'll kind of darken that up. And instead of it being super shiny on the froth, I'm going to roughen it out just a bit. Let's see. There we go. Something like that.